the impacts of forklifts on the U.S. economy, how AI is helping logistics employees, and supply chain optimization gains adopters. Pull up a chair and join us as the editors of DC Velocity discuss these stories, as well as news and supply chain trends on this week's Logistics Matters podcast. I am Dave Maloney. I'm the Group Editorial Director at DC Velocity. Welcome. Logistics Matters is sponsored by Cardex. AutoStore, empowered by Cardex, offers the fastest order fulfillment system per square foot. Cardex's intuitive picking assistant and Fulfill X software optimize AutoStore, providing customers with unmatched storage density, inventory accuracy, and operator efficiency for maximum ROI. When you think AutoStore, think Cardex. Find out more at cardex.com. As usual, our DC Velocity senior editors Ben Ames and Victoria Kickham will be along to provide their insights into the top stories of this week. But to begin today, many of our listeners use forklifts in their supply chain operations every day. They really are the workhorses for moving products within facilities. But you might be surprised at the impact that the forklift industry makes on the overall U.S. economy. Recently, the Industrial Truck Association, that's the organization that represents the forklift industry, partnered with Oxford Economics to evaluate those economic impacts. I spoke recently to Hamilton Galloway, the head of the U.S. consultancy for Oxford Economics. He was the lead researcher on that economic impact study. Here's our conversation. Thank you, Hamilton. It's good to have you with us on Logistics Matters.
Appreciate it. It's great to be here, Dave.
For those who are not familiar with Oxford Economics, can you describe the work that you do?
Certainly. Oxford Economics is a leading global economic advisory firm. We provide data-driven insights and forecasts to help clients navigate really complex economic landscapes and challenges. Our unmatched economic expertise across more than 450 economists and analysts delivers actionable solutions to drive growth and resilience. Within my group specifically, we quantify and demonstrate the social and economic impact of an industry's or a company's activities, really to evaluate the economic effects of policy changes at global, national, and local levels. We do this primarily to better communicate with and inform various audiences.
And of course, you just finished a report, as I mentioned in the opening. It's called Lifting America, the Economic Impact of Industrial Truck Manufacturers, Distributors, and Dealers. This research was done in conjunction with the Industrial Truck Association. That's the trade association for lift truck manufacturers and related industries. Of course, your study was conducted independently. What was the criteria that you used for conducting the research?
Yeah, absolutely. So in every study, we seek to be as thorough as possible in our research approach. This is, of course, always subject to any constraints such as data availability, timing to complete the research, and so on. But importantly, that independence and objectivity in our research combined with a methodological rigor is a cornerstone to our brand as a company. So ITA commissioned us to demonstrate the economic contribution of lift trucks as well as the distributors and maintenance aspects associated with that sector. The research criteria, therefore, really drew in both publicly available data, such as industry data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Bureau of Economic Analysis, as well as private data collected and compiled from ITA, MHEDA, to provide us with a full picture, or as full a picture as possible, of the lift truck sector. So off the back of this data collection activity, we then use specialized software to model and map the upstream economic activities that are associated with the lift truck supply chain, as well as the contribution of the employees who work across the lift truck value chain, who then go out and spend their incomes in the economy and drive further demand for those consumer goods and services that we all purchase. And then from this, we then map all these economic activities by where the lift truck production takes place, as well as the interstate supply chain activities across each U.S. state, so we can really better understand how the economic activity tapestry of lift trucks is woven into the American landscape. So that at each step along this modeling journey, which we, of course, are doing in close collaboration with ITA, getting verification and confirmation of some of the assumptions and things that we're doing along the way here, there's always inevitably new insights gained in understanding that it's being generated, much of which helps us to really tell or better tell the story of the lift truck sector.
So, what were some of those key findings and insights of how the industrial truck industry impacts the U.S. economy?
Yeah, our headline figures showed that there's $36.6 billion in GDP supported, which represents about 257,500 jobs and about $8.4 billion in tax revenue. If we drill down just a little bit further into this, we actually find that manufacturing represents nearly half of the jobs and half of the GDP supported overall.
So, let's dig down a little bit into the report of some of the aspects that you talked about. How does the industry, for example, impact employment in the United States?
Yeah, it's a great question. From my perspective, there are really two ways to view this: the jobs supported and the jobs enabled. In this study, we really only quantify the job supported impact that I had just mentioned earlier, but these capture that direct, indirect impacts, which are those that are tied to the supply chain effects, as well as the induced impacts, which are the employee wage and salary spending effects. Very well. So that approach is very well defined, and we have these models we've developed to really estimate the relative number of full-time jobs required to produce a certain amount of inputs that go into actually manufacturing lift trucks, as well as the jobs in lift truck sector. So from this, we have found that the sector directly employs about 68,500 jobs, but also supported an additional 90,000 workers through those indirect supply chain activities and another 99,000 jobs through the induced economic activity. However, when you're looking at this from a bit of a broader employment effect and impact for the industrial truck sector overall, you also have to maybe look at a little bit more of what those jobs enabled. And this is a tricky part and something we really don't get into in the study. And it's mainly due to the opaqueness of the downstream users of lift trucks and really our ability to quantify the productivity gains associated with the users of those industrial and lift trucks. So if you think, for example, of the efficiency gains and the throughput capabilities that industrial trucks provide in boosting productivity across transportation logistics, retail and wholesale, and nearly every goods producing sector in the US, there's a considerable value that's being generated. And then if you consider the fact that ITA estimates that 4.5 million people in the US who operate forklifts are all impacting the employment and productivity of workers in hundreds of those sectors, you start to get a sense of what the scale of the actual employment and the value of the industry is overall. So our study only estimates it represents just the manufacturing sales and the maintenance of the lift trucks themselves. However, one could easily argue that the mighty industrial truck industry elevates much more of the U.S. economy than our study actually measures.
It does look like it's rather significant. And of course, it does contribute also to tax revenues, both nationally and at the state levels. And you took a look at that in your study as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those two certainties in life, right? Taxes. Our modeling incorporates taxes collected at multiple stages of production and spending. We factor in your traditional national taxes, those that are levied on corporate profits and payroll, as well as taxes collected across each state, such as property, sales, school district, and excise taxes. So when capturing supply chain activities and tax generation, because often suppliers operate in states and locations that are different from lift truck producers, we have to be mindful of those state and local differences in tax code regimes. And then finally, when workers are out there spending their money in those state and local economies, they are too supporting a tax base, which we also must take into account. So in the end, this rolls up to 8.4 billion in total taxes, and from this, about 5.2 billion is federal, 1.9 billion is state, and 1.3 billion is local.
You just mentioned states. Are there some states or regions of the country that benefit more from the lift truck industry than others?
Yeah, absolutely. So some states and regions have much more concentrated activities of industrial truck manufacturing, sales, and maintenance. Moreover, a lot of their supply chains still do prefer to be within some level of proximity to those manufacturers. So therefore, much of the value associated with the sector occurs in those locations, which would be places such as Texas, Ohio, North Carolina, California, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and so forth. However, it's still important to note, though, that all states benefit because somewhere in that economic impact tapestry, the industrial truck is interacting with every U.S. state's economy.
Right. And of course, the states that you mentioned are the ones that seem to be more heavily involved in both manufacturing and distribution. So that makes a lot of sense.
Indeed.
And of course, while your report was conducted before the recent trade wars began, do you have any insights into how they may affect the market for industrial trucks? And that's considering everything from higher prices for steel to possible tariffs on imported forklifts.
Yeah, that's another really great and very timely question. I should probably first ask how long you want this interview to run. But there's a number of perspectives that I think can be taken here, and so maybe I'll just pick on a few. One is the length of a potential trade war, or the duration of the actual tariff itself. So short-term effects, if a trade war resolves quickly, will likely have minimal disruption. A prolonged trade war, though, will inevitably affect many of the components that actually go into lift truck manufacturing. So take, for example, that one of the fastest growing segments of lift trucks are electric powered. Those high capacity batteries are generally not made here in the US, and building out the manufacturing capacity for batteries doesn't happen overnight. You aptly mentioned steel. Much of the raw material is imported from places such as Canada and Mexico, and then transformed into the parts and components that make lift trucks. So once again, the US can't just simply build out the raw material capacity overnight. So therefore, the cost of producing a lift truck is set to see a considerable increase in the wake of a long-term, drawn-out tariff or long-term trade war scenario. But let's also contrast with the potential risk of things like a recession or market volatility. So, one clear outcome is a slowdown in productivity of those sectors who actually purchase the lift trucks, coupled with the possible reduction in investment and capital spending for those same sectors. So, in other words, the sectors that are buying lift trucks, those that are in logistics and transportation, those that are in wholesale and retail, they just won't buy as many forklifts, or perhaps they'll delay replacing old forklifts, simply because they don't know, or they're assuming a trade war might be a short or medium term phenomenon. So this in turn reduces those number of lift truck orders and creates some strong headwinds for the lift truck sector. But ultimately, the punchline here is jobs, livelihood, and ultimately household economic self-determination are all really put at risk.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. Is there anything else you'd like to point out about your research that we have not yet discussed?
There's one fact that I've always enjoyed in this particular study, and that's mainly because we don't see it as often in other studies. The industrial truck sector has an affinity for veteran employment, or perhaps veterans have an affinity for working in this sector. I'm not quite sure which one's pushing which, but nonetheless, 8% of people, so that's about 1 in 12 workers employed directly in the lift truck manufacturing sector, are the brave men and women who served our country. Contrast that with 5% overall across the U.S. economy, or about 1 in 20 workers. I think that's, it's quite an interesting finding in terms of the role that the lift truck sector plays with our veterans.
Yeah, definitely. That's good to see. We've been talking with Hamilton Galloway. He's the head of the U.S. consultancy at Oxford Economics. Thank you again, Hamilton, for being our guest today.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Dave.
Now let's take a look at some of the other supply chain news from the week. And Ben, most companies are taking a hard look at how artificial intelligence can help their operations. And this week you wrote about how AI is having an effect on overworked logistics employees. Are those effects good or bad?
Yeah, it's a great question. We've seen so many headlines about how artificial intelligence can help businesses to work faster and achieve more goals. Now, that's the business doing that. We haven't yet seen much coverage about how that technology is affecting the actual workers in the warehouse who are affected by those changes. So this week I saw a study that drew that distinction. It came from a Texas-based firm called ActiveTrack. They provide workforce analytics software. And they had studied workers across 23 different industries, focusing on user activity behavior for more than 2,000 logistics employees compared to their cross-industry peers. That was study stretched from 2022 to 2025. And their findings were concerning because they found that workers in the logistics sector have the highest burnout risk among U.S. laborers, leading all industries, with 20% of workers being overutilized and 15% at risk of burnout. what does that mean exactly? So to define the terms, they said that overutilization refers to an employee who exceeds their daily productive hours goal by more than 30%. And burnout risk applies to employees who spend more than 3/4 of their time being overutilized like that.
Ben, obviously, burnout isn't good for either workers or their employers. Did Active Track suggest any solutions to this problem?
Well, solutions so far are difficult. Of course, AI is in its early innings here, but the study also found that the logistics industry has the longest workday at 9 hours and 10 minutes, which was almost half an hour longer than the cross-industry average. But also, logistics workers are heavy users of AI, and their daily AI usage runs about 3 minutes longer than the overall average. So the question is how that heavy use affects the entire operation. Active Track's chief customer officer, Gabriella Mock, said, logistics leaders face a double-edged sword. Their teams demonstrate the highest daily productivity and AI adoption in the workforce, yet they're also at the greatest risk of burnout. And she said, amid external pressures like rising tariffs, sustaining performance requires smarter workload design, which means redistributing tasks and managing collaboration overload, and ensuring that AI isn't just adding efficiency, but also alleviating pressure. So that's the goal. It's good to have something to work toward.
Right. And I'm sure that any AI solutions to help people be more productive and keep them from burning out are welcome. And probably it should be in every manager's toolkit.
Probably, and it's the managers who also have to learn to apply it in just the right way for everybody's interest.
Exactly. Thank you, Ben.
Glad to.
And Victoria, you wrote this week that supply chain optimization is gaining in importance and adoption among supply chain managers. Can you tell us why these practices are being applied?
Yeah, that's right. And of course I can, sure. So we often write about supply chain optimization and the different strategies involved in that. And earlier this month, I came across a survey that details how important this has become since the pandemic and how it's even more so right now as companies deal with an uncertain business climate. The survey is from RSM. It's a tax advisory and consulting firm for middle market companies. They surveyed more than 300 supply chain decision makers and found that companies are prioritizing technology investments, compliance, and outsourced services to optimize their supply chains and adapt to changing regulations, specifically as they navigate today's evolving trade and tariff landscape. The survey respondents represent a variety of industries in North America, and they all had annual revenues between $10 million and $1 billion.
Victoria, what were some of the results? How are mid-market companies implementing some of those strategies?
Well, the authors made the point that mid-market companies, can't be as nimble or quick to pivot as larger firms when it comes to adjusting their supply chains. So that makes it tricky in the current climate. So what these mid-sized companies have been doing is making strategic investments, particularly in technology, over the past several years to deal with the disruptions that stemmed from the COVID-19 pandemic. I can share a couple of the highlights. So they found that, in their words, tech investment is a priority, not a luxury. And they said that although 93% of the respondents said they feel confident about the accuracy of their supply chain data for decision making, nearly as many, 91%, agreed that they need to invest in technology to manage those operations more effectively. And interestingly, 88% said they're interested in exploring how artificial intelligence can help drive supply chain success. They also found that mid-sized companies feel prepared for all this uncertainty we're seeing out there, but cautiously so. 85% of the respondents said they are prepared to navigate evolving trade and tariff policies over the next 6 to 12 months, for example. And regarding all the tariff rollouts, 40% predicted a negative impact, 36% expected a positive impact, and 24% foresaw, no impact. Now, it's important to note that this study was done in March. That was before the Trump administration's sweeping tariffs and the subsequent, back and forth, partial rollbacks, and more recently emerging deals with some nations. Nevertheless, it seems like companies are focused on supply chain optimization strategies to deal with any impending changes that come along. There's more to the survey, of course, and readers can find a link to it in our coverage.
Great. Thank you for that. And I imagine that supply chain optimization would help companies to better weather the huge volatility that we have seen, no matter what happens.
Exactly. Planning is key.
Right. Thank you, Victoria.
You're welcome.
We encourage listeners to go to dcvelocity.com for more on these and other supply chain stories. Also, check out the podcast notes section for some direct links to read more about the topics that we discussed today. And we'd like to thank Hamilton Galloway of Oxford Economics for being our guest. We welcome your comments on this topic and our other stories. You can email us at podcast@agilebme.com. We also encourage you to subscribe to Logistics Matters at your favorite podcast platform. Our new episodes are uploaded on Fridays. And a reminder that Logistics Matters is sponsored by Cardex. AutoStore, empowered by Cardex, offers the fastest order fulfillment system per square foot. Cardex's intuitive picking assistant and Fulfill X software optimize AutoStore, providing customers with unmatched storage density, inventory accuracy, and operator efficiency for maximum ROI. When you think AutoStore, think Cardex. Find out more at cardex.com. We'll be back again next week with another edition of Logistics Matters. Be sure to join us. Until then, have a great week.